Coming up on Nebraska Stories, newly discovered rare footage of Grand Island, saving sacred indigenous seeds, protecting the bighorn sheep of Sow Belly, Omaha's devastating Easter tornado of 1913, and celebrating 150 years of art and literature.
Grand Island, Nebraska, 1926. Captured on flammable nitrate film. And here's the same view shot with a video camera, 90 years later. The past meets the present.
Thank you for coming.
We're at the Grand Theater for the premiere of Hometown Movies. This is filmmaker John Sorensen's gift to his hometown.
The earliest footage in the film is from 1926, and there's like a high school class graduation.
And his tribute to a man generations of children will never forget.
Hi, folks. I'm Wally Kemp from Grand Island Drive-In Theater. Been out to Hollywood. Very enthusiastic about the pictures that's coming forth. I want you to take a peek at a few of them. Thank you.
Wally Kemp, longtime manager of the Grand, had Hollywood connections. But his real gift was getting kids excited about movies.
For the summer shows, he would come on stage, and I was one of those kids. My parents were some of those kids before me, and he would come out and he would say, "I'm so glad to have you all here. I want to do a few special things I do every year to start the shows. So first of all, we're going to sing God Bless America." God bless America, my home, sweet home. Everybody, turn to the booth. And now, on with the show!
This is one of the hometown movies Wally Kemp collected over the years and screened in this very theater. Only one copy of this film was ever made, and after Wally Kemp's death, no one could find it. Until John Sorensen got in touch with a film curator at the Storr Museum in Grand Island in the 1980s.
And we spent a day searching all over the grounds trying to find something. He finally went, "There's a room I hardly go into, there's a desk in it with a drawer, I think I may have seen some film." We got in there, he opened the desk drawer, cigarette in mouth. "There's all that film," and I said, "Tom, put out the cigarette." Because some of that, the 1926 was, they call silver nitrate, highly flammable stock, and it could have blown up the whole museum.
John took the nitrate film to an expert, Paul Eiseloffel of the Nebraska State Historical Society.
We wanted to make sure that it hadn't degraded in any way. We were very careful about unrolling it and looking at frame by frame. One thing that I found when I was researching the film is that it was made with the intention of actually documenting the town. So they took great pains to show businesses, to show community leaders, to show pioneers, to show school kids, a whole spectrum of what the city was like at the time.
Another surprise from Wally Kemp's collection, Hollywood comes to town in living color. In 1939, Paramount Pictures rented a train to transport celebrities to the Omaha premiere of a new film called Union Pacific, with a stop in Grand Island along the way. The whole town came out to see Barbara Stanwyck and director Cecil B. DeMille.
It had this national, regional, local aspect all kind of colliding into this one event. And I think it really documented that event very well. I think the moving image is probably the most important document of the 20th century. If we didn't have the footage of the moon landing, the Rodney King footage, if we didn't have the Zapruder film of the Kennedy assassination, how would our lives be different?
And sometimes the moving image simply captures everyday life. These are rare scenes from downtown Grand Island in December 1945, at the end of World War II.
And it's like Frank Capra came to town and found It's a Wonderful Life actually happening and took it down as a reality show. It's very powerful.
Just point the camera at what's happening, capture that, and that's what home movies are all about. Downtown is where things were happening. That's where you wanted to be.
From shadows of the past into the full light of the present.
Great.
Wonderful. Fabulous. Oh, I liked it all.
It was wonderful.
Educates me a little bit.
My grandparents lived here, so I was looking for them real hard in the films.
And surprise, Buzz Doffett recognized his father from the long-lost footage of 1945.
I couldn't believe it. You know, my dad was a tremendous skater. He grew up in Fullerton area on the Loop River, and they had an old guy from Norway taught him how to ice skate. And he could do figure eights, backwards, frontwards, terrific skater. I think that picture was probably taken at Shimmers Lake, and they had an ice skating club. I couldn't believe it. I'm so anxious to call my sisters and tell them I saw Dad out there skating.
So here it is, preserved for all time. Lost and found film. The past waving at the present. Nothing more, nothing less than shadows on the screen.
Yana, oh yana, hey Nate. We yana, yana, oh yana, hey Nate, oh way. Yana, oh yana, hey Nate. We yana, oh yana, hey Nate. We yana, oh. This is what was formerly known as my backyard, and is now home to the Four Sisters, corn, bean, squash, and the sunflower. My Western given name is Taylor Keene, but I carry other names as well. Among the Omaha tribe, I carry the name Bagija, which means buffalo mane. This effort here is called Sacred Seed. Sacred Seed is, for the most part, around the Four Sisters. From the Four Sisters comes all the bounty and all of life. First sister is the corn. We know, scientifically speaking, that it takes a lot of minerals, most of which is nitrogen. And so the The second sister, the bean, we like the pole climbing beans, but they put the nitrogen right back into the soil. Yeah, third sister, squash. Where there's squash, I don't know if it's in the little hairs on the vines or the flowers or what, but the raccoons will not step foot into my backyard here. And the sunflowers, they pull a lot of the heavy metals out of the ground if there's any, so it helps purify everything. But their main purpose, as I discovered again this summer, is as a windbreak. It's an obstacle course back here. We put a considerable amount of time and effort trying to find non-GMO indigenous heirloom seeds. Experimented with some southern varietals. Have a green Oaxacan. We're fighting a cultural bias within it as well. Corn, especially here in Nebraska, is synonymous with apple pie. Our quote Indian corn is only ornamental and is sold only around Thanksgiving time. And most people don't even think it's edible, but where does corn come from? It comes from us. After I began to find seed, then I sat down with many of the elders within our tribe and asked for their advice and blessing, as it were, that it would be a good thing to do again. In my mind, I envisioned a future where everyone in my tribe could be corn planters again, that somehow we could sustain ourselves, be economically self-reliant again. The whole notion that I refer to as living red is getting back to living the way indigenous people should. Grow your own food. Deep red. Take care of it, foster it, love it, and then it will love you back. Way on na, oh, way on na, and they away.
With this radio telemetry equipment and this directional antenna, we can actually hone in on where the bighorn sheep are. So that's telling me it's back off over here to the east.
Todd Nordine is the manager of the Big Game Disease and Research Program for the Nebraska Game and Parks Commission. Today, he's tracking bighorn sheep in Sowbelly Canyon near Harrison.
We're just northeast of Harrison, Nebraska, located in the Pine Ridge escarpments of this northwestern part of the state. Pretty unique landscape, and it's ideal for a lot of the big game wildlife that we have out here.
Below the weathered sandstone buttes, the spring-fed Sowbelly Creek ripples through the canyon floor. And wildlife can be spotted throughout the area.
Historically, we had bighorn sheep all over western Nebraska, and there was a lot of bighorn sheep in this region of, the Sowbelly Canyon, Pants Butte area. But unfortunately, in the early 1900s, they were extirpated from the state, and that was primarily due to disease issues and some habitat loss and unregulated hunting.
In the early 1980s, the Nebraska Game and Parks Commission began reintroducing bighorn sheep to the Nebraska Panhandle. Then, in 2012, with the cooperation of a private landowner, bighorns were brought back to Sowbelly Canyon.
Jim Voller, he was very interested in the program. We brought 41 bighorn sheep in from Alberta, Canada, and did a hard release. They thrived and took right off, and our population about doubled, within just a couple of years. But then we began to see a setback, and that occurred in 2014.
The wild sheep became infected with Pasteurella pneumonia. It's treatable in livestock, but not so in wild, free-ranging bighorns.
When bighorns get infected with this, it's actually a bacteria, and it can come from various sources. It's pneumonia, and it generally is fatal. The unfortunate part about those survivors is it's often passed on to the newborn lambs in the following years. We've had successes despite that. We've got approximately 350 bighorn sheep in Nebraska now, and that's in the Pine Ridge and the Wildcat Hills. It's great to be a part of the surveys and seeing the elk and the mule deer and all the big game species and how well they're doing. I grew up in the eastern part of the state, and I certainly enjoyed that region, but coming out to the west and being a part of big game, that's what I enjoyed the most, and that was my
future, I guess, in terms of helping do good things for wildlife and in particular big game. So I'm pretty happy out here to be involved with all those species. You know, the bighorn sheep has become, you know, probably one of the most important, I guess, to me. Bighorn sheep's probably the biggest quest at this moment, I guess, to see what we can do to get them back in Nebraska and keep them going.
One newspaper called it the Devil Cloud, one of 7 tornadoes ripping across eastern Nebraska on March 23, 1913, Easter Sunday. By nightfall, these tornadoes left paths of death and destruction never seen before or since in the state.
It's the worst tornado event to ever occur in Nebraska's history.
In just 2 hours, powerful twisters ripped through Omaha, Ralston, Yutan, and Otoe, called Berlin at the time. 168 deaths in Nebraska and Iowa, mostly Nebraska, hundreds injured. The Omaha, Yutan, and Berlin tornadoes today rank as the 3 deadliest in Nebraska history. Damage was estimated at $10 million, which would be more than $200 million today.
The number of people that got killed, the fact that you had 7 tornadoes in a fairly close area like that, fairly long track tornadoes, made it very significant.
It's hard to imagine the night after the tornadoes. Friends and relatives desperately searching for loved ones, alive or dead. Rescuers following cries for help, digging through piles of rubble that used to be houses, and looters grabbing what they could from these same ruins. Homeless, injured survivors wandering unrecognizable streets, cold, rain-drenched, often without much clothing. Houses and public buildings turned into makeshift hospitals, relief stations, and morgues. Passing cars turned into ambulances. Imagine the resources that would have existed in 1913 to deal with a disaster of this magnitude, then take away most of the power and phone lines blown away by the tornadoes. Imagine a frantic, chaotic atmosphere that the next morning Governor John Moorhead, touring Omaha, would describe as like my conception of hell. Help quickly arrived for Omaha and other stricken communities. Special trains, buggies, and cars brought doctors and nurses from near and far, including this large group from Des Moines. In Omaha, soldiers, state militia from throughout Nebraska, arrived to help restore order. 6 temporary relief stations were set up in the hardest hit areas of the city.
They were cooking the meals and feeding those in their care. They were tending to their medical needs, changing bandages, helping with personal hygiene. They were trying to find out the names of these people and where they lived.
Omaha's auditorium became a central relief station, serving free meals of soup, bread, and coffee, also serving as a dormitory for the homeless and a storage depot for supplies. There was an outpouring of support, donations of money and items of all kinds.
Omaha received outside aid from Studebaker Automobiles, International Harvester. Money came from Regina, Saskatchewan, Canada, and also money from Johnstown, Pennsylvania, because Omaha had donated money and supplies after their flood in 1889.
Different groups held fundraising events, concerts, and other benefits. Local newspapers helped generate support and ran long lists of donors and donations. Contributions as small as 50 cents or a pillowcase were recognized. Yutan was reportedly swamped with donations of clothing and groceries from nearby towns.
I think here in Wahoo, within 24 hours, the businessmen called a meeting and raised $500 just that night, just among the businessmen. And then the ladies started getting involved, gathering clothing, gathering food.
So I think in 1913, we see this same thing that we see today. We see that people really do come together in these circumstances and do so effectively.
And there was money to be made off the storm. Picture postcards and books were for sale within days. Maybe the most unusual for-profit account of the storm came in the form of a song.
As the day turned into night, the wind howled.
Hans Parkinson of Omaha wrote and published The Omaha Easter Tornado. The sales pitch: your collection of pictures, stories, and other archives of that event is not complete without this impressive and inspiring song.
Snuffed out many lives.
It's not surprising there would be interest in sheet music. Whether it's Omaha or the rural communities, pianos are easy to find amongst tornado debris.
I think that was probably one of the very first big purchases that they had. You know, they didn't have television or anything, so that was the source of their entertainment.
Those pianos that were flying through the air, or destroyed or put in odd places by the tornadoes, those reflected the material culture.
Piles of debris were everywhere. Omaha designated the weekend of April 4th and 5th, 2 weeks after the tornado, for cleanup. In a seemingly remarkable effort, 5,000 volunteers were organized into groups and assigned to work in different areas of the tornado zone. Each was led by a contractor or someone else accustomed to directing the operations of large gangs of men.
There were school children that were out helping with the recovery effort. There were Creighton medical and dental students who were out helping with the recovery effort.
Men and women started at 7 a.m. Saturday, clearing rubbish, raking lawns, and piling up twisted, splintered furniture. One newspaper noted, side by side in the debris, the millionaire worked with his bankrupt brother. The effort was so successful, the majority of the work was done after the first day.
The city just really came together to each other's aid.
I think the remarkable thing is how quickly Omaha did recover and move on about its business. And I suspect that the same generalization would hold true for the rest of the area of eastern Nebraska, western Iowa that was impacted.
I think it is an American story because it speaks so deeply to who an American is. And we're all in this together, and we're going to rebuild, and we're going to help each other.
As Nebraska celebrates 150 years as a state, some of its most significant contributions can be found in the colors and sketches of its artists and the lasting words of its authors.
We've got a few selections of that ink and fire here tonight.
Each year, the Jocelyn Castle celebrates the best in art and literature with a week-long festival. In connection with the state's sesquicentennial, the focus this time is on some of Nebraska's most noteworthy cultural exports.
I think what's surprising is just how varied this is. What I love about them is they're also accessible for people and really are just fun and unique and sort of embody the spirit of Nebraska.
There were many artists to consider, but one they chose is Grant Tyson Reynard. An artist who grew up in Grand Island, Reynard was a musician and a well-known illustrator in the early 1900s.
When his exhibit came and was unpacked here, I instantly recognized some of the work. I'd seen it, but I hadn't ever really put the name with that piece, and hadn't made the connection that, oh, this is a Nebraska artist that did this.
Some of Reynard's most famous works depict everyday experiences.
They're real people. The lady looking at the artwork over there at the modern art, I go to a lot of museums. People do really do that. They're stupefied by it sometimes and think, what can that mean? But if you stand there long enough, something happens and you say to yourself, that really is a slice of life that you're seeing there.
Reynard also had a connection to one of Nebraska's most notable cultural exports, author Willa Cather. The two, who grew up not far from each other, met in New Hampshire in 1928.
She gave him a piece of advice that he describes as a significant turning point in his career. She said that her greatest success had been when she returned to things that she was familiar with in her youth and growing up in Nebraska. And that was something that he sort of took to heart and really describes that as being a point where he changed the focus of his work.
Cather's imprint can be found on many Nebraskans. Her work brought the stark plains of Nebraska to a wide audience.
Well, Cather is widely recognized as one of the most notable, or the most notable, Nebraska author. In total, she produced 12 novels.
She was the first notable author to put Nebraska and the Great Plains on the map. Cather was really one of the pioneers of her time. For a woman to be an editor of a newspaper or a novelist, let alone a Pulitzer Prize-winning novelist, that was a really amazing accomplishment for a woman in her day.
The Joslyn also hosted a performance of Cather's works, a collection titled The Scribe of Webster County.
I reckon he means by that is that Harv ain't asked him to mortgage any more farms lately so as he could go on with his education. Seems like my mind don't reach back to a time when Harv wasn't being educated.
The actors performed selections and moved from room to room throughout the castle.
The land did it. It had its little joke. It pretended to be poor because nobody knew how to work it right.
The performances included excerpts from Cather's works, her novel O Pioneers, her short stories, and public addresses.
With these smaller, intimate rooms, the sense of storytelling and kind of around the fireplace are really heightened. And also it puts you in the space. As an actor and as a playwright, I found her dialogue really vibrant and alive and just individual to the characters and very current.
But William never heeded ominous forecasts in the domestic horizon.
After watching this tonight, I saw her insights into people and her ability to look at how attachment to the land influence people's lives and decisions.
I love female writers, but I love writers that take what they know and the environments that they come from and sending them out to the national scene, which is what she did. And she won a Pulitzer, and it's impressive and inspiring, and I can't wait to learn more about her.
And that was the goal of the festival, inspiring Nebraskans to learn more about all of these authors and artists.
Watch our stories online at netnebraska.org/Nebraska Stories and go to Facebook to like us and leave a comment. Join the Nebraska Stories conversation. Nebraska Stories is funded by the Margaret and Martha Thomas Foundation, the Nebraska Department of Roads Highway Safety Office, the Nebraska Tourism Commission, and First Nebraska Bank. Sustained funding for arts coverage on Nebraska Stories is provided by the H. Lee and Carol Gendler Charitable Fund.